This is a hearing to consider objections made to the West Lothian Council, Raw Holdings, East Calder, stopping up construction of a new road and diversion of core path number 1 order 2022. The order was made by West Lothian Council using its powers under Section 207 and Section 208 of the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act 1997. The order seeks a temporary diversion of NCN 75 during construction works and a permanent diversion of part of the route. These diversions are marked on schedules to the order. I would like to remind everyone that this hearing is being webcast live by DPEA. The video recording will be retained on the website afterwards. Attendees and participants at today's hearing are taken to be consenting to the use and storage of these images and sound recordings for webcasting and training purposes in line with DPEA's privacy notice, which can be found on our website. I'd like to start with some introductions. So my name is Sue Bell. I'm the reporter appointed by Scottish ministers to consider the objections and to report with my recommendations as to whether the order should be confirmed. You'll see that I'm accompanied here by my colleague, David Spears, who is here to manage the audio and IT elements of the hearing. 4 objections to the order were received, and I believe that we have 3 of those who made objections here today. So perhaps I could ask you to introduce yourself, starting with the person closest to me. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michelle Heron, with Not Much of a Voice, and I'm an objector.
Thank you very much.
Isabel Brady, I'm also an objector.
Thank you very much.
Ian McIntosh, I'm also an objector.
Thank you very much. We also have representatives here from West Lothian Council, and perhaps I could ask you to introduce yourselves, please.
Yes, good morning, ma'am. Thank you. My name is Cameron Gregg. I'm a senior associate at Morton Fraser McRoberts. I'm joined here by my colleague Judith Baxter, who's sitting at the far right there. It's a colleague of my firm. I'm representing and appearing for West Lothian Council today. I'm joined by 3 representatives from West Lothian Council. To my left is Mr. Tony Irving. He's a Principal Planning Officer with the Council. To my immediate right is Ms. Victoria Mangal, Development Management and Transportation Planning Manager with the Council. And to her right is Mr. William Cunningham, Engineer.
Thank you very much. So the purpose of today's hearing is to enable objectors an opportunity of being heard in line with the requirements of Schedule 16 of the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act 1997. It will also enable me to gather all the information necessary for my report. The format of the proceedings will be that of a structured discussion, which I will lead. I've already undertaken an unaccompanied site inspection, and I've also read all the documents that everybody has submitted during the application process. Well, the appeal process, and these will all be taken into account in the preparation of my report. Please note there's no requirement for formal presentations of cases, and there will be no formal cross-examination unless I specifically agree to it. I would ask you to note there's no need for you to repeat the content of your written submissions verbatim, but if you want to refer me to particular documents, perhaps you'll allow me time to find them and for us all to find the appropriate page and paragraph number. On that point, you will see that I'm still a bit old school and I'll be scribbling notes rather than just relying on the video recording. So you might need to allow me time to make sure I've made a note of your points accurately. Although I shall invite specific people to contribute to the discussion at certain times, I will welcome comments and questions from you as the discussion progresses. This is designed to be a discussion rather than a formal inquiry. Depending on how rapidly our discussions progress, we may take a short break during the morning. If, however, at any time anybody feels that they need a break, coughs, drinks or whatever, please make me aware of that, and I'm sure we can fit that into the programme. So is everybody clear about the procedure this morning? Yeah? Okay, thank you very much. Well, we'll make a start then with item 2 on the agenda, which is the suitability of the proposed temporary diversion. So the powers under Section 207 and 208 allow for the stopping up or diversion of roads, footpaths and bridleways where the local authority are satisfied that it is necessary to do so to enable development authorised by a planning permission to take place. So in this case, I believe there are 2 planning permissions are relevant. Is that correct from Council?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Thank you. So could I just perhaps start off, ease us all into this, ask you to explain why you felt a temporary diversion was necessary in respect of these planning permissions?
Thank you, ma'am. I'll pass over to Tony Irving to answer that query.
Thank you. In short, the temporary diversion is required to facilitate the build-out of the two planning consents to Calder and Persimmon, and also in particular to facilitate the construction of the replacement route.
And that was it wasn't possible to fence off that area whilst the construction was taking place and leave the existing route as was during that period?
No, given the southern end at the Calder site, the upgrade of the route is along the same alignment, so you couldn't have the same route. And on the northern portion, on the Persimmon portion, the new route is just slightly further west, but the proximity of the construction works wouldn't make it feasible to keep the pre-existing route open.
And then following on from that, could I ask you to just clarify how the temporary diversion route was decided, the process that was undertaken?
Essentially just discussions with the planning and roads officers to look at a route that would be the shortest as possible, and wherever possible use Lothian adopted paths.
And were there any alternative routes to the one that was chosen, looked at? Were there any other options?
I think any other options would have been considerably longer along any other Lothian adopted routes.
So perhaps if I could turn to the objectors now, and I don't know, you're all allowed to chip in on each question that I ask, if you want to. So I'd just like to ask in what way you find the temporary diversion suggested and suitable. So I don't know who wants to tackle that question.
I'll get over my coffee, so if you turn to my colleague first, then that might be easy.
Yes, from the legislation as I see it, a temporary diversion has to be able to accommodate all users who used a core path, i.e. walkers, cyclists, horse riders. Now, if, as you say, you have had a site meeting, you will realise that the suggested temporary path along Main Street at a tight corner, the busiest corner in East Calder, certainly isn't suitable for cyclists because the post office entrance is on the narrowest section and there's also a playgroup coming out on that section. It's a blind corner. I didn't think also that you should recommend that adult cyclists cycle along a footpath when there actually is a £30 fine for doing so. As somebody who has used the core path for horses for the last 40 years, there's certainly you could not ask a rider to ride along that temporary path, along a main street and round that same corner and then around the health centre, which is always congested by cars and pedestrians. So as far as I see, the suggested temporary route was only suitable for pedestrians, certainly not for cyclists and definitely not for horse riders. And there's several horse owners on the south side of what was the core path who, when the path was closed, they have had no access whatsoever down to Hacking on the railway line or indeed Armandale Country Path. The temporary path suggested for the alternative to Calder actually had a sign from West Lothian saying no horses. So people who owned horses in our area have had no access north and south since the core path was closed.
Thank you very much. Do you want to-
I would just like to echo Mrs Bridie's comments there. I would also argue, as a regular user of NCR 75 on a bike, that the alternative path does have a huge potential for conflict with cyclists. I never ever saw any dismount signs on the alternative pathway, and I would certainly endorse the view that both the alternative route on the main street, which is particularly busy and dangerous because of the points Mrs Bride has cited, are wholly unsuitable for riders who frequently used the path previously prior to its closure. There was also no alternative offered for what were frequent users of that route by horse riders. Again, I think the proposals were dangerous and ill thought through and reflect a massive lack of consultation and engagement with those affected or potentially affected, both on the part of developers and West Lothian Council. The pathway that was temporarily put in place when the developer closed off the northern end of NCR 75 was unusable for anybody who had a physical disability, such as myself. I cycle because I can't walk very well. The aggregate was laid down was probably about between 3 and 7 centimetres in size. It was impossible to cycle on that, and there's no way that you could take a pram or a buggy along that. It was so rough and irregular. Albeit I accept the developers did that unilaterally, but again, I feel that West Lothian Council's failure to consult made a hugely negative impact on previous and subsequent users.
Thank you, Ms Harron. Do you want to?
I just echo that. My colleagues have just essentially outlined what I've outlined in my objection, and to avoid a coughing fit, then I won't repeat myself or repeat what they've said.
Thank you.
Could I just have a follow-up on this? When you ask if there could have been an alternative, the very rough, hardcore path that Persimmon put in unilaterally, when I had a meeting with Graham Hope, Chief Executive, I suggested for pedestrians, if West Lothian or Persimmon could have put some fines or sand down and rolled it, it may have been acceptable, certainly to cyclists and certainly pedestrians. Nothing came of that whatsoever. And I find it quite difficult to know whether we're talking in the present, the past, or the future tense, because we've been dealing with something that has been closed for 2 years.
Okay, thank you. Could I maybe sort of break that down and ask a couple of questions then of the council based on what we've heard? Do you have any comments in terms of how the route suitability was considered for all users, particularly cyclists and horse riders we've heard would experience difficulties?
I think it's probably fair to say that diversion route, when considering it, the focus was probably firstly on pedestrians and cyclists. The council has acknowledged that does narrow down as you go past the post office. If the order was confirmed, I think the council in its submissions has said appropriate cyclist dismount signage could be used to address that. Alternatively, there is the option before you get to the post office of directing cyclists across the road to the north side of Main Street and using the footpath on the north side, and then they could be redirected back to the south side once you get past that narrowing down, and then they could continue then south past the partnership centre and the health centre.
So just two points of clarification there. One is, are you suggesting the cyclist should be using the footpath? And secondly, I don't recall there being any sort of official crossing points, if you like. What you're suggesting, so cyclists would just have to make their own decisions about crossing rather than having an assisted crossing.
Well, there's not push traffic lights, but there are 2 pedestrian refuge islands there, which would assist crossing.
And in relation to being on a pavement, are you suggesting the cyclists cycle on the road or on the pavement, just so I'm clear, because there's a question about the route from that point of view.
In sections, as you come along there, the footpath is well in excess of 2 metres wide, both on north and south sides. So it is deemed for a temporary diversion route. Sufficient width would be available. Bear in mind there would be signage to alert users of the path of the dual use.
And what about horse riders?
I think it's probably acknowledged that that's a little bit more difficult. But I mean, I think perhaps horse riders would have the choice of using the road as well for a short stretch, and then rejoining path network past the health centre.
And would there be any restriction on horse riders coming through the park? Because I remember the path being quite narrow in places.
Not to my knowledge.
Is there anything that anybody wants to say in response to that?
I would like to challenge the fact that you are suggesting that horse riders use a road. Which road are you talking about?
Main Street.
Main Street.
Yes.
I competed with horses at an international level for 40 years. I used the lane almost every day because there's a friend has an all-weather surface on the south side. If you're schooling young horses, you cannot, under any circumstances, use a main road. I also have a friend who shows at international level with Clydesdales and carts, and because after Calder Wood was developed and there was a very good path there, which was the Drovers Road, when that was built over, the only access she had to work a young horse was up that lane. Luckily, I don't compete at my age anymore, but other people do, and they have for 2 years been unable to use a safe route, particularly when a lot of good hacking is in Armadale Country Park and also the railway line. The people on the south side of the lane, as I call it, have had no access whatsoever to hack off main roads. And to say that you are suggesting that horses use the main roads in East Calder, you have no idea about horses.
I would just like to add to that, both from a cyclist perspective, but also on horse riders. The diversion route that was posted in place by West Lothian Council was dangerous to pedestrians for 2 reasons. The initial part of the path around south northwards towards East Calder Park is at a gradient which allows ready acceleration of a push bike without any pedalling. So cyclists would tend to have to control and manage their speed all the way down. There's also a very slight gradient from the path from the start of the East Calder Park to behind the health centre. That part is particularly busy from the Mansfield junction that's the west of Mansfield Estate right down to the health centre. It's very heavily used, so there would always be significant conflict with cyclists and pedestrians. I'm also flabbergasted that anybody who would want to share a narrow footpath with a 1,000 kilo animal on a similar footpath. I mean, that was the path that was advertised. And I just find it ludicrous that West Lothian Council officers think that's appropriate, that many horse riders would be expected to share that with pedestrians and accelerating cyclists. Additionally, I don't know if you had the misfortune to experience driving along East Calder Main Street, but it's dangerous for cyclists on the road. The paths that Mr Irvine referred to, certainly the north side path, has numerous drops and junctions on it, so it's not particularly safe for cyclists. You'd have to dismount and remount repeatedly because of the drops. There are no graduated drops. And again, I dispute the fact that it's as wide as Mr Irvine says, because certainly the houses on the north side of Main Street, immediately east of the entrance to Armadale Terrace, that's a narrow path, and narrows again very rapidly as you go past the old cottages north of St Teresa's Church. On the south side, once you get to St Teresa's Church, there is no pathway whatsoever. So again, I dispute Mr Irvine's assertions that this was considered carefully on the part of West Lothian Council when proposing an alternative route for cyclists and pedestrians.
I think I'd just like to add, and it's been touched on already, is the the narrative around signs to dismount, signs for horses to cross the road and cross back again could have been placed. Well, there were no signs. There are no signs, and this has been the situation for the last 2 years. So picking up on Isabel's comments about what time period we're referring to, we're looking back to the situation, and no such signage was ever in place. Noting the fact that we think the alternative path was undesirable, even if it had been desirable, there were no associated signs put up.
NCR 75 is still signed up the old lane. The old signs are still there 2 years later.
Is there anything that the council want to say in response to some of these questions? Particularly, I have asked you already about alternatives, whether you managed to look at any alternatives for horse riding or different routes perhaps for horse riders and cyclists compared to pedestrians and people wheeling, or whether it was just a single route that was being explored.
I think the key was just to try and establish a shortest route, yes, using the existing lit and adopted network. As I said, cyclists could use the northern routeway, which would give a further option and reduce conflict. As acknowledged in terms of horse riders, options are more limited. I think any diversion route would be for horses could be far more longer, and that would have to be looked at in further detail if it was considered necessary. But for a short stretch of road, there is an option there.
And can I just ask, was there any, in defining the route, and you've explained clearly about looking for the shortest route, but was there any kind of assessment or recording of the numbers of current users and their breakdown in terms of different types of user using the route before, in terms of helping to inform the process of identifying a suitable alternative route?
No, there was no specific survey undertaken prior to that.
Okay, last question then. I'm conscious that we're in a slightly difficult position. The order hasn't yet been confirmed, and yet obviously there are some barriers on that route at the moment and construction is taking place. But what is the period, the duration of the temporary diversion that would be sought under the order?
That length of time is we're probably around to be about a year from now. At that time on the northern section, Persimmon will have made its way, work its way from west to east back towards the route. So a year from now, approximately.
So had the order been made before any closures were put in place, as it were? So you were talking about a total period of 3 years, perhaps, for a closure, temporary diversion of the route?
Probably along its northern section, yes. Along its southern section, you'll have seen from your site visit that the new route is formed, surfaced and lit, and we're working with Calder in terms of opening that in early course.
I think I have sufficient information about the temporary diversion, so if everybody's content, I would like to move on to the permanent diversion. you indicating you want to say something else, Mr. Macklin?
Just simply that West Lothian Council has in place a number of policies, and it strikes me that in terms of their obligations under the community empowerment legislation, they singularly fail to make any efforts to engage with local communities or the users. Actually gobsmacked to hear from Mr. Irvine that no usage survey was undertaken, notwithstanding it was no consultation. I'm gobsmacked that no consideration was given to the previous level of use. In terms of the reference to it being a core path, it also seems that West Lothian Council totally neglected to take account of their commitments and obligations for its use as a core path. They have policies about protecting greenways and blueways. That core path was designated as a key greenway, and again, it seemed that the stopping up order, though it hasn't been put in place yet, the developer then chose to destroy that greenway. It was absolutely hugely populated with fauna and flora and invertebrates, and you know, regardless of what happens in future, that is gone forever. That's a thoroughfare that's been in use for hundreds of years, and it can be readily evinced by looking at the historical maps and National Libraries of Scotland, as well as many older people who remembered it from, you know, the late 19th century onwards.
Okay, thank you. Council wanting to say anything to that? Or?
I would just add, ma'am, that I do appreciate that the objectors have a number of concerns relating to the unilateral operations that have been undertaken by the developers and in relation to the planning and access processes. But they're, of course, not relevant to the determination that's before us today for in this particular form.
Okay, thank you very much.
Could I ask that
We've not gone on to item 3 yet.
You're not.
We're about to move on to item 3,
right,
but I was just concluding item 2.
Okay.
So we'll be moving to item 3 now. Okay, thank you. So in terms of item 3, which is the suitability of the proposed permanent diversion, I think it'd be helpful if the council can just sort of summarise. I mean, to me, it looks like the new route would be substantially along the route of the existing, if I could call it that, previous NCN 75, apart from at its northern end. Is that correct?
That is correct. You're, in terms of how it will differ, I mean, it will change in character, absolutely, from being an unmade surface and route to being a 3 metre wide asphalt surface and lit. On the northern part of the route, on the Persimmon site, it's realigned slightly further westwards. On the southern part of it, on the Calder portion of it, it's along the same alignment.
And in terms of, I think you've mentioned the dimensions there, but if you just want to perhaps sort of, if you're able to sort of summarise that difference, if there have been any difference in terms of width, surface and the proposed users, whether, because I think the previous lane vehicles could travel down, is that correct?
Yes, you could, yes, there were vehicular rights north-south. In terms of width, will be a 3 metre wide hot rolled asphalt surface, lit and adopted by the council. With the previous width was probably 3 to 4 metres wide, pre-existing.
And the new route will not allow vehicular access, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And perhaps you just talk us through why the permanent diversion is taking place at the western sort of the bit at the northern end, why there's a change.
You're referring to the northern section past the school. Well, there's other access rights over that land. It's used to access the church car park to the rear. Therefore, when you get up to the northern part, you see the route then goes through the Persimmon site. Again, the route will continue to be 3 metres wide. But the northern section up past the church will remain in its existing form and available for use as it presently is.
So, yes, I'm going to. Do you want to pick up on some points of that before I ask?
Yeah, please. Yes. Just to correct Mr. Irvine, the northern side, the route is diverted east, not west. It runs east from the south side of Linekilns Farm, Paddock, and then swings north again onto what was the old A71, opposite the, I think it's Calder Garage. So it'd be reassuring if Mr. Irvine could remember which direction the route took.
Okay, so I was going to ask whether you would like to elaborate on your concerns about that diversion, because once the new route is in, substantially, apart from this bit at the top, the northern end, it looks like it's along the similar alignment to before. But I'd like to hear your
from what I've been able to see before the fencing is taken down, is it's going to be down a footpath. There are curbs and such like. Should pedestrians or cyclists wish to use the remaining part of the northern route from behind St Paul's Primary School past St Teresa Church, they would then have to jump up curbs. My suspicion is that the vast majority of users will continue to use that stretch, despite it not being a redesignated preferred route, partly because it's the shortest route and it's a safer crossing to cross from between Linekilns Farm and St Teresa's Church, straight across on the line of the old railway, straight down in Armadale Country Park and northwards to Pumverson and Broxburn.
Mrs. Frodie, did you want to...
Yes. The replacement path, we had a tree-lined core path with 130-year-old oak trees, which have disappeared. It was hedging on both sides, wildflowers. It was what I would suggest is a country core path. The replacement on the south side, the elevation is completely different to what it was, and the width, we have a pavement. We won't have a core path. We will have a pavement through a housing estate. We will not have a tree-lined core path, which is very pleasant for people to walk. And I saw the surface, although it's blocked off at the moment. The pavement will be a skating rink in the winter time, and the elevation as it comes to the north is a downward slope. The surface will be unusable even if West Lothian Council agrees to allow horses to use it. Will be a skating rink in any frosty mornings, would be unusable for horses. So the width will be much narrower. The elevation is completely different. There has been absolutely no community engagement whatsoever to come to some sort of agreement. Now, West Lothian Council, in my view, have completely failed to follow through their own core path plan, which states West Lothian Council's core path plan will take priority for maintenance and improvement, as well as protecting from development or closure. Question one I would like to ask is, what steps has West Lothian taken to protect the core path from development or closure? And secondly, a letter I received as far back as 2018 stated, and I quote, "With regard to NCR 75, this is a core path and statutory public rights apply. Consequently, the developers will have to maintain access along the route during development works, the Council's planning and roads and transport teams will be involved throughout the development of the site to ensure appropriate access is maintained. I would like to ask, how many meetings did planning and roads and transport have? When did they have them? And what was the outcome?
I think it might be helpful if the Council can just sort of explain how the, almost going back over perhaps some of the ground we've covered earlier on about how the need, as the Council see it, for the route diversion came about and how that relates to the planning permissions, and perhaps then pick up on one or two of Mrs Brady's points along the way, if that's possible, please.
I think, as your Mrs Brady's points are all noted, and these are points that were, third points and various other points from community involvement over many years leading up to the grant of the planning consents. So I think, as I said, the nature of the route is changing, and that reflects the planning consents granted, and the need for this temporary diversion is to allow full implementation of those planning consents.
So just to be clear, the nature of the path changing was as a result of the planning application. So the consideration of the changing character that would need to be occur as a result of the development was dealt with as part of the planning applications rather than as part of this order.
Yes, that is correct.
We have,
to pop your microphone on, Mr. Bryden.
We have the Chairman of the Community Council, the Secretary of the Community Council for 10 years during the whole of the planning process. At no time were we told that the existing core path would be closed and totally destroyed. What we were told was that the core path, following on from the completion of development, would be resurfaced and lit. And I think both Michelle and myself attended virtually every planning meeting there was. And that's what we were told. At the completion of development, the core path would be resurfaced and lit, quote unquote, from Mr. Irvine.
Excuse me, just to add to that, I think we were also told that the core path would be surfaced in an appropriate way to allow access for all users. And I distinctly remember, and I need to go back in my notes, a conversation about what that surface might look like in terms of a wind surface, which would be appropriate for horse riders and still be okay for people with buggies and bikes and things. Certainly, I was not ever given the impression that it would be, in a sense, a pavement. And also, I have some concerns about, and we maybe talk about that in terms of access to the pavement, as in going up the level of the pavement, because currently the curbs are really high down there, and I don't know what's going to be done about that.
Yes, it is a movement, and because the new road was put in to access St Paul's School and that parking area, at the moment the levels are all up and down. However, there is agreement with the council that when the extension to St Paul's is completed, the lane, as I will call it, from the main street to the end of the tower will be closed to cars. So it would be very easy, if the council had a mind to do it, that there is that much of a step from where Persimmon has started putting the path, which would be unusable for electric wheelchairs and so on, much too much, or if kids were cycling on it, much too dangerous, because it comes straight on to the access for the Persimmon new houses. It wouldn't be difficult, given a bit of thought, that curbs could be lowered so that people could still come from Langton Road right down and out the road they've come for hundreds of years past Lime Kilns. And people will want to do that. They will not want to swing round and out at Calder Wood. They will still want to walk. And as I say, the agreement with West Lothian is when St Paul's extension is completed, that lane will be blocked for cars. I think I have to get an access into the field for moving sheep and so on, but the agreement with the council and for the church car park is probably a post, and both of us would get a key so that when we need to get into either, we could fold it down, but it would still be accessible for pedestrians. So there needs to be a look at the pavement heights and so on as round about what I would call a bugger's muddle, round about the entrance into St Paul's car park.
So just to be, excuse me, just to be sure that I'm understanding you correctly, what you're suggesting is that the permanent, there doesn't need to be a diversion at that point.
No.
That if appropriate measures were put in.
A change of heights for the curbs to make it accessible for electric wheelchairs and bikes. And I don't know what you call them, where the curb goes flat to allow buggies and bikes up. There would be no need for that complete diversion round and out of Calder Wood.
Perhaps I could ask the council to explain why you felt it was necessary to propose that diversion to the east rather than continue, reinstate, if I can call it that, the existing route.
I think what Mrs. Bride was saying, when we're Persimmon are doing, I appreciate that still hasn't got its wearing course. There may well be drop curbs not yet formed, because there will be appropriate drop curbs crossing points. So I think what you're referring to at the moment is you don't see those drop curbs. So you're absolutely right. People will want to continue to walk northwards, yes, and if they want to do that, they will be able to do so. There will be a drop curb simply because the service vehicles serving the school extension will come down the new road, and then we'll have to head northwards up that existing route. So
I thought that was for only emergency vehicles.
Well, that will be, the council needs to still service the school from that way. So the stretch northwards isn't affected by the order. You're right. There may be probably a need for a future measure to restrict vehicular access rights down that stretch, but that is a matter still to be resolved in terms of how that is done and the timescale of how that is done.
So just so that I'm understanding, so the stretch north of the school and by the side of the church will remain as it is at the moment, for want of a better phraseology, but that will not be part of the core path. You're diverting so although the physical infrastructure is still there, it won't be recognised as the core path. The core path will be diverted along that eastern route through the new estate.
That was the intention. Obviously, there are separate procedures to be taken through in terms of the core path plan, and that will be done separately to this process.
I suppose my question then, I go back to before, which is why is there a need for the diversion at that point if there's nothing physically going in to prevent passage north along the route it's traditionally gone? Why did the council feel that there was a need for the order to divert it to the east permanently?
Simply because the planning consents have the 3 metre route continuing in a north-easterly direction. There's traffic lights going in at the junction to the Persimmon site, and that will facilitate easy crossing across Main Street to the north. But in practice, people will be able to continue to walk northwards up past the church if they want to do so.
Is there anything from the objector's side that you wanted to just clarify in that discussion?
Answer from the transportation and engineers as to how many meetings they had, when, and what the outcome was, as promised in the letter to me in 2018.
I'm happy for the council to sort of tell me whether that's relevant to this process or whether it's a separate thing, because I'm conscious that there'll be a lot of discussions going on between parties which are not part of this process, and it's quite difficult sometimes to tease them out.
I wouldn't see that as being relevant to this process, ma'am.
So these were questions in relation to the community council questions, asking of questions of the council, presumably. Mrs. Brown.
No, that was... I was beginning to get worried in 2018, and I wrote myself. It's part of my submission.
Yes, yeah, okay, right, thank you. So I think just the element that I want to clarify and pick up on with the council is that there's been a suggestion that the new route might not be suitable for all users again, and particularly I think we've heard concerns about horse riders. So I'd just be interested to hear again from the council what your view is on the design of the new route and whether that's going to be designed for horse riders, and also the element of the drop curbs, which I think was mentioned by Mr McIntosh in terms of concern for cyclists if their cycle route has a number of drop curbs and exits across it.
The route has been designed as a 3 metre wide, as I say, surfaced cycle path, similar to many you'll see across West Lothian. At all appropriate points where we're crossing, there are drop curb crossings. The detail of that is controlled through the roads construction consent in place for the new route. So it's a 3 metre wide multi-surface route available for, as I say, for pedestrians, cyclists, and indeed, I mean, a lot of the NCR 75 as it heads westwards out of West Lothian is similar width, and that's used by pedestrians, cyclists, and horse riders. So it is a multi-use path.
So just to clarify, it's your sort of standard design, if you like, for this type of path that's designed for all users?
It's the common 3 metre wide specification.
And I just wanted to clarify something else. I think you mentioned to me that it would be adopted, but I don't think the previous road I read was adopted. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Anything from the objector side, Ms. Heron?
Just, I guess, a point of clarification. Certainly, having been involved in the planning process, one of the community concerns about the new path, in whatever shape or form it was going to, understandably, be going through 2 significant development areas, and there was a likelihood that traffic was going to be moving from one side of the development area across the path to the other. So I would be interested to get a feel for how that's going to be managed.
Okay, if you want to respond to that, would be helpful. Thank you.
I suppose with any construction site, the health and safety matters are a matter for the developer first and foremost. For instance, on the Calder side, once the route is opened, yes, there'll be traffic going from east to west, but that's no different potentially than traffic entering any construction site off an adopted road or footway. It happens probably on every construction site. Drivers coming out just have to be aware there's a live network in place. And if developer needs to think it needs to take any particular health and safety matters or steps, that would be a matter for its own risk assessments. But as you come in the Persimmon site at the moment, you come off an adopted road where people are crossing, and it's a live road, so it wouldn't be any different to that. So
can I just clarify, you're concerned about during the construction period. So there's a suggestion that the core path would be reopened before the construction work is complete. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I'm concerned at both phases, so the construction phase and once the construction phase is complete, and actually homeowners are moving across the path in terms of the road network that's going to be connecting the two development areas. Because my understanding was from planning, and I think Isabel will probably agree with this in terms of our experience, was that there were going to be some points where traffic would cross the core path, and there was various conversations about raised curbs and split fences and various other things. So I'd just like some reassurance as to what will in fact be in place.
Well, you can respond to that if you like. The design is on the plans, is it not?
Yes, I'm to answer essentially these are, I think, matters which are not entirely relevant to this process, but you're right. Once the development is finished, there's a couple of occasions where traffic will cross east-west with the north-south route. At that point, there are raised tables, essentially to slow down traffic, and essentially to give make it clear that the north-south is the priority route, and there's appropriate staggered pedestrian barriers on either side.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll just let you say, Mr. McIntosh, but
just to make the point again, that NCR 75, that historical route before it was even a cycle route, was safe and protected. There was only ever one crossing on it previously. That was again a historical road accessing from the east side of East Calder into the Raw Holdings. There are now 5 crossings between the developments. So I just want to echo Michelle's points that this is a recipe for accidents. I don't think there's been a good road traffic assessment here in terms of the consents that were given. My experience as a resident is that raised tables tend not to slow traffic very much. I would prefer to see speed reducing measures that would reduce traffic to walking speed crossing NCR 75. All too often I see even sleeping policemen being totally useless at stopping particularly young and aggressive drivers driving excessively. My concern remains, and I will be submitting this to Council, about prediction of unnecessary road traffic incidents. I have seen the behaviours of people all too often across the country, and unless there are significant speed reducing measures, I do fear that it's likely to be a child who will be the first casualty in this development.
Okay, thank you. I think I have what I need on that element. I understand both parties' positions, so if everybody's content, I would like to move on to...
If I may, just... It would have been possible during the development, because planning consent was given on east and west of the core path. It would have been possible for the council to have had an agreement with both Persimmon and Calder to have put banksmen at the crossing point to keep the core path as it was, but to have a crossing point, both Persimmon and Calder, with a gated crossing and a banksman. It would have cost Persimmon maybe 25,000 a year, the same for Calder, because Persimmon did do it when it suited them for their own site and their own yard. A banksman by Calder could have put on where it was gated, where construction traffic was going east to west, with a banksman on to open it when people were using the core path, and the same for Persimmon. West Lothian Council have completely failed in trying to protect the core path and work out a way to preserve that path.
Thank you. Unless the council want to respond to that, I would Do you want to? No? Okay. Then I would suggest we move on to item 4, which is the procedural matters. And it'd just be helpful, I think, for me to just understand the timeline, given that we've got a little bit of complications with various things going on. So if you can just, there was questions, I think, about when things were advertised and when and where notices went up. So it'd just be helpful for me to have a little timeline to be sure that what I've got written down is correct. Thank you.
Of course, ma'am. Perhaps one for Mr. Irving, but my understanding is the proposed order was published in the West Lothian Courier on 28th July 2022 and in the Edinburgh Gazette the following day, and site notices were erected on the 28th of July 2022 as well at the 4 locations that are set out in the plan that was submitted. The Council's position, of course, is that it's complied with all the necessary statutory procedures when making and publicising the order. Mr. Irving, do you have anything to add?
No, nothing to that, thanks.
Thank you. And I note that you've also provided copies of the letters notifying the statutory undertakers as well. That was part of the...
That's correct, ma'am.
I'm prepared to allow some questions, but as I explained in the letter beforehand, I can't get into a discussion here about whether or not things were shut ahead of time before the order was noted, because that's not something that is within this jurisdiction. But I'm happy to listen to some comments that you might have about other procedural matters. So I'll start with Mr. McIntosh.
Yes, thank you. It's in relation to the Council's duties and policy in relation to protecting core paths. It strikes me that was a singular failing on the part of the Planning Department to do that and expedite their employers' policies. I'll be taking that matter up separately with the Chief Executive. More importantly is that there has been restrictions on access. My understanding is that developers only have up to 14 days for temporary closures of established footpaths and pathways, and that's been breach of my rights under the Land Reform Act. And I'd like to hear what measures, if any, planning considered in relation to those withdrawals of access rights.
As I explained, that's something that's out with today, I'm afraid. I understand your comments, but it's not something that I can report on.
Thank you. I acknowledge that, but I would appreciate, just since Mr. Irving and his colleagues are present, I may be able to get a quicker answer rather than submitting that query as an FY to the Chief Executive, if he's willing to do so.
It's entirely up to you, Mr. Irving.
I mean, I think in short, the discussions on that go out with planning matters. Yes, so with other functions of the council have responsibilities for the access reform legislation. So it's not something I would comment on further at this time.
Thank you. Mrs. Bradley, did you want to?
Yes, probably the reason that you only have 3 people sitting here today is because the notices, well, there's 2 reasons. I think in my submission I photocopied the advert that went into the Courier. The circulation of the Courier in East Calder is probably about 30. The notices that went up were A4 notices, but they were put up at the ends of an already closed path, so nobody was walking past them and nobody saw them. They were drawn to my attention by one of the people who lives there when I was out walking, but nobody else was seeing them. I suggest that had the proper procedure been gone through and the advert and the notices had been put up when the core path was still open, instead of having 3 people sitting here, you would have had several hundred sitting here. So the public, unfortunately, were totally disregarded in being able to make their objections known. It wasn't visible, and if my husband hadn't drawn my attention to this tiny little advert in the Courier, which I don't buy, was passed on to me, I wouldn't have seen it either. And as somebody who was obviously very interested in what was happening, I would have missed it, as well as most other people in East Calder.
Okay, thank you. Did the council want to respond about the normal processes for advertising things? You've explained where this was advertised.
Just to say, ma'am, that the statutory requirements for notification are set out in the in Schedule 16 of the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act 1997, and as I explained earlier, it's the council's position that they've all been complied with in this instance and satisfied.
Okay, thank you.
Because surely, under the statutory obligation, they have to be put up at the ends of a core path that is proposed to be closed, not after it has been closed, when then nobody is walking past them. The statutory duty is to put up notices to a proposal, not a fait accompli.
Okay, I think I understand the positions of both parties, unless the councillors want to say anything on that. Okay, Mr. McIntosh.
Just a pointer, as I've never heard of nor read the Edinburgh Gazette. The West Lothian Courier used to be a very popular media across the county, but not for many, many years. And currently it has a circulation of less than 1,000 a week across West Lothian. So I would just request that maybe West Lothian Council reconsider how they publish planning notices in future. A publication that receives a circulation of less than 1,000 a week across the whole of the county is probably no longer appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Heron, do you want to? No. Okay, anything?
Just to echo what's already been said.
Thank you. Anything final from the council's point of view? Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for that. That's been very helpful. I have what I wanted to get out of this morning. I don't know if there's anything that is within the jurisdiction of what we can discuss this morning that people want to pick up before we close. Anything from the objector's point of view?
Just one thing I would like to ask is that under the Land Reform Act 2003, under all the other obligations for core paths, the local authority shall establish a local access forum. I have tried unsuccessfully in West Lothian to contact such a forum. Maybe somebody could tell me if there has been the establishment of a core path forum in West Lothian.
It's not ready for this morning, but I'm very happy if the council wants to pick up on that.
I don't know myself, but I could find out for you and advise. I don't know myself.
Okay. Mr. McIntosh, were you trying to raise something? No, you're fine. Okay.
I'm frustrated that West Lothian Council choose to ignore its own policy and procedures and legislation, but again, it takes matters up separately with the council and the Scottish Government.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing else to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything from the council's point of view?
Nothing further, ma'am. Thank you.